All right, so you know those people who are like always running behind,
Hmm.
like always scrambling, always apologizing, missing deadlines. We've all got stories.
Yeah.
And it's easy to just be like, oh, that's just how they are. But you sent over some research about chronic lateness, and
Yeah.
let me tell you, it gets pretty wild. We're
Yeah.
talking brain chemistry, we're talking cultural differences, like how our perception of time itself can be different.
It's true. It really goes way beyond just, just bad time management.
Okay, so let's start with something everybody can relate to.
Okay.
The planning fallacy.
Railway?
We've all had that project we thought would take an hour, ends up taking 2.
Exactly. But for people who are chronically late, it's like their whole life is the planning fallacy.
Wow.
They underestimate how long things will take by like almost 40%.
40%, that's huge. So
Yeah.
is that what time blindness is all about?
That's definitely a key factor, yeah. Time blindness is this real phenomenon where people, oftentimes it's linked to ADHD, where people really have trouble perceiving the passage of time.
So it's not just them being bad at math, it's like a neurological thing.
It is. It all comes down to how our brains are wired, right?
Right.
And dopamine, the neurotransmitter we always talk about, that's related to like reward and attention.
Hmm.
Well, it turns out that plays a big role in how we experience time.
Hold on. Dopamine affects how we experience time.
Yeah, so think of dopamine kind of like a metronome in your brain that's helping you keep track of time.
Okay.
So when your dopamine levels are different, that metronome is either going to speed up or slow down.
I see.
So time gets distorted.
Okay, so somebody with ADHD might literally be experiencing time differently because of those dopamine fluctuations.
Exactly. And not only that, studies are showing differences in brain structure, especially in the areas that are responsible for executive functions.
Okay, now what are executive functions?
So that's like the control center in your brain that helps us plan, organize, manage our time, all those good things.
So if that's not functioning the way that it should, then, I mean, no wonder you're always running behind.
Exactly. It can be a real struggle, even with the best of intentions.
So if you are chronically late, and it is because of ADHD and time blindness, is there anything you can do, or are you just kind of stuck with it?
No, not at all. I mean, awareness is always the first step.
Sure.
But, from there are strategies, there are therapies and medications that can help manage time more effectively. It's not about, like, fixing someone, but it's about finding the right tools.
Right. That makes sense.
To deal with their everyday life.
Yeah, because it is easy to be judgmental
No, totally.
when somebody's always late. But this really highlights that there are very real neurological reasons.
Absolutely. And even for those whose lateness isn't tied to, like, a diagnosed condition, just understanding the psychology of why we procrastinate can be super helpful.
Okay, so speaking of procrastination,
Yeah.
it's not always just as simple as I'm bad at time management.
All right.
Sometimes it's like, what's the why behind why people are putting things off?
You're right. That's the key question. Like, we often think of procrastination as laziness, but there's real emotions there. Fear of failure, perfectionism,
Oh, yeah.
anxiety, all of those can contribute to delaying tactics.
Yeah, no, I have definitely fallen into that, to procrastinate and then panic. Like,
Yeah.
there's that last minute scramble and you're stressed, but then it's almost like there's a weird thrill to it too, right?
Yes. That's like the paradox of procrastination. That last minute push that you do, you get that rush of adrenaline. Some people even come to like thrive on it. They associate that pressure with productivity.
Oh, wow.
Like they can't get anything done unless it's, down to the wire.
They need that fire under them.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. So they call that productive procrastination.
Yeah, productive procrastination.
I love that. But is it really productive though? Or is it just, are you just justifying the chaos?
It's a little bit of both. Some people really do work well under pressure.
Sure.
But for most of us, it's not sustainable in the long run, right? You're going to burn out, your stress is going to go way up, and honestly, the work might not be as good.
So it's like, we've talked about our brains on time. We talked about procrastination,
Right.
that whole productive procrastination thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another layer to this whole being late thing, isn't there?
Yeah.
Culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Because what's considered late in one part of the world might be perfectly fine in another. It's like different cultures have like different relationships with time itself.
Yeah, totally. Like you can't separate how you think about time from like how you grew up and the culture that you grew up in. Remember that study we were looking at
Yeah.
about the American and Brazilian
Oh, yeah.
perceptions of time?
It was so interesting how different they were.
Yeah, it was a really good example of like clock time versus event time cultures.
Okay, yeah. What is the difference between clock time and event time?
Okay, so in clock time cultures, which is, like the US, a lot of Western Europe, Germany,
Hmm.
punctuality, that's like the most important thing, right?
Right.
Time is precious, it's a limited resource, so if you're late, you're being disrespectful of other people's time.
Time is money. Right.
Exactly. Then you've got your event time cultures. So that would be more like Latin America, the Middle East, parts of Africa. And it's more about the event, not the clock.
Okay.
It's about just being present, being flexible, letting things unfold naturally.
So less about sticking to a rigid schedule, more about going with the flow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was so interesting because even the way that they design their clocks is different. Remember, it said that like public clocks in Brazil were way less accurate than the ones in the US.
Oh, wow. That's so funny.
Yeah.
It's like ingrained in the culture.
Totally.
Down to how we tell time. That's so wild. I mean, it makes sense, though, that those different approaches could cause some issues when you've got these two cultures that are trying to interact.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Imagine somebody from like a really strict clock time culture trying to do business with somebody from a more laid back event time place.
Oh, it'd be a disaster.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So how do you navigate that? Are there tips?
Well, I think just like awareness, right? Like if
Mhm.
you're going to a new country or you're going to be interacting with people from different backgrounds, just, Google it, do a little research. What are their social norms when it comes to time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are they generally on time?
Right, right.
Do meetings start and end on time? That kind of thing.
So it's like researching the local customs, but for time.
Exactly.
Okay, that
Yeah,
makes
I-
sense. Now, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but you had mentioned that social status can also play a role
Yeah.
in some cultures in terms of how lateness is perceived.
Totally. So in some cultures, like where there's more of a hierarchy,
Okay.
being late can actually be a way of showing that you're more powerful.
Interesting.
Like, think about it. A CEO who walks into a meeting 15 minutes late and everyone's been waiting for that.
They're trying to make a point.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm in charge.
I'm more important. Yeah. And of course, this is all, context dependent.
Yeah, okay. So we've got our brains, we've got the psychology, we've got the cultural aspect. Is there anything else that we're missing in this whole deep dive into lateness?
Well, we can't forget about our own internal clocks.
All right, yeah.
Our chronotypes, because those have a huge impact on our sleep-wake cycles, which, obviously plays a role in, like, our relationship to being on time.
Chronotypes. I love this stuff. This is like this is why I can't function before my second cup of coffee.
Exactly.
Explain chronotypes to us.
So you know how some people are just like morning people and some people are like, they don't come alive till 10 p.m.?
Yeah.
It's basically the scientific term for that, right?
Okay.
And researchers have identified 4 main chronotypes. So you've got your larks, your owls,
Mm-hmm.
and then the in-betweeners, the robins and the hummingbirds.
So early birds, night owls, and then...
And then, yeah, the ones in the middle.
Okay.
Right, so larks, those your classic morning people. They're up before the sun, ready to go at like 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And then you've got your owls. They don't really hit their stride until like evening, nighttime.
Right, you're right.
And then the robins and the hummingbirds are somewhere in between. They're kind of like, most alert midday, late afternoon.
So if you're a lark, you're probably going to be on time for that 8 a.m. meeting, no problem. The owls are probably still hitting snooze.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, the larks have a little bit of an advantage when it comes to, especially in our society, we're so like 9 to 5.
Right.
They're just naturally more alert in the morning. But, and this is the thing that's really interesting, it's not just when you sleep. It's how you manage time throughout the day.
Really? Being a lark or an owl affects more than just your sleep schedule.
Yeah, totally. Studies have shown that, like, morning people,
Okay.
they tend to be more conscientious. They're better at time management in general. They're better at planning. They're good at estimating how long things will take. They can stick to a schedule. Evening types, maybe not so much. Maybe they're more likely to procrastinate.
So if you're a night owl, are you doomed?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Again, it all goes back to awareness.
Really?
Once you know if you're a night owl or a morning person,
Yeah.
you can kind of work with it instead of against it, right?
Right. Like there are things you can actually do to like shift your natural sleep-wake cycle, even if it's just a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like light exposure,
Like-
sticking to a sleep schedule.
Sure.
Even like what you eat can make a difference.
It's true. It is not about like, becoming somebody totally different,
Right.
but working with what you got.
And this reminds me, you had that study about those college students and their chronotypes.
Yeah, yeah.
And it turns out that they weren't fixed. Like some of them shifted over time.
Yeah. A lot of them actually switched during the study
Right.
over the course of like a semester.
Did they become morning people?
Well, I mean, some of them did. The ones that shifted from like the evening to the morning chronotype, they had some really positive changes actually.
Like what?
Well, for one, they weren't as sleepy and they said they were sleeping better.
What?
Get this. Their GPAs were higher
No way.
at the end of the semester.
So there is hope for us late bloomers.
There is.
Oh my God.
Our brains are so adaptable. Like, even if you aren't, like, naturally a morning person, you can work with your, what you've got and have a better relationship with time.
This is blowing my mind. Like, we went from just blaming bad habits to, like, brain chemistry, cultural norms, our chronotypes.
It's a lot.
It really shows that chronic lateness is complicated.
It's so complex.
It's not just about being rude or, disrespectful of other people's time.
Right. Like you said, it's not just a personal failing.
Right.
It's all these things. It's our biology. It's how we were raised.
Wow.
And understanding that is so key for, like, having more compassion.
Right.
Both for yourself and the people in your life.
I love that. Going from judgment to understanding. But, okay, if somebody's listening to this right now and they're like, okay, but I'm still always running late, what can I actually do?
Well, I think
What would you say?
it always goes back to that awareness, that self-awareness piece.
Yeah.
Pay attention to when you're late and why.
Yeah.
Are there certain patterns? Does it happen with certain people?
Right.
Just kind of notice.
You can't fix what you don't acknowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then once you know what your patterns are, then you can experiment with different things,
Okay.
There's a lot of time management techniques out there.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to, like, break down your tasks into smaller pieces or use a timer.
Right.
Give yourself extra time between appointments, that kind of thing.
And then if it's procrastination, I mean, there are things you can do about that too.
Oh, for sure. Figure out what's at the root of that procrastination.
All right.
Is it fear of failure? Are you a perfectionist?
Mm-hmm.
Are you just feeling overwhelmed? And then once you know the why, then you can kind of address it.
It's all about working with yourself, not against yourself.
That's exactly.
Not trying to force yourself into some box of, like, what on time should look like.
Yeah, there's no right way to do it. Everybody's different.
That's such a good point. Oh my gosh. Well, this has been, this deep dive has been so insightful. Like, I feel like I have a whole new perspective.
I'm glad.
Not just on lateness, but even on myself, honestly. It's good to get to the other side of those why questions sometimes.
Totally. And it's amazing what you can learn when you really do kind of dig below the surface.
Yeah, because sometimes, like, what seems like a simple little quirk or habit is actually, like, it can teach you so much about, like, how your brain works or different cultures.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
And once you see how it's all connected, then you can start to make changes in your own life.
Well, to our listener out there, we hope that this deep dive gave you a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And keep asking those why questions. Keep diving deep.